My ex-boyfriend invited me to his wedding just to flaunt his wealthy new fiancée and the luxurious life he thought he finally secured. But when I arrived with an unexpected guest from her past, everything unraveled in the most shocking and humiliating way imaginable. My former boyfriend invited me to his wedding, clearly intending to parade his affluent fiancée, but my unexpected guest dramatically altered the situation. I am a 22-year-old woman who first encountered Dylan, a 30-year-old man, when we were both employed part-time at Starbucks. At that time, Dylan was focused on repaying his student debts, while I was still pursuing my degree, diligently saving funds to permanently relocate from my parents' residence. Their excessive gambling habits had led to substantial financial burdens, making it impossible for them to support him. Our initial bond deepened through discussions about our family challenges, and over time, we realized we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. 2 years later, I completed my studies and had accumulated sufficient savings to live independently. Dylan, however, remained unable to leave his parents' home, still struggling with his student loan repayments. I extended an invitation for him to move in with me, but he couldn't even manage his share of the rent due to his existing debts. I agreed to cover 80% of the rent, with him contributing the remaining 20%, an arrangement he readily accepted. We decided to split all utility expenses equally, excluding the rent itself. Dylan and I worked for different organizations. I had a corporate position with a flexible schedule, allowing me to work from home if my objectives were met, which my supervisor permitted without issue. His job, in contrast, was hands-on, requiring him to be present on site for prolonged periods. Because of his demanding work schedule, Dylan often found himself unable to assist with household chores. Consequently, I took on all the cleaning, cooking, laundry, and dishwashing. Understanding the intensity of his profession, I initially didn't mind handling most of the domestic responsibilities. He did tend to eat last, though, so I made one request, that he take out the trash. Regrettably, Dylan consistently forgot, leaving me to dispose of the garbage every morning before I departed for my own job. One weekend, I returned home to absolute disarray. Empty food containers, chocolate wrappers, and unwashed dishes cluttered the kitchen counter. The trash had not been emptied, and a mountain of laundry had accumulated. All I desired was to unwind after a taxing day, but the mess was simply unbearable. I spent the entire evening tidying, hoping Dylan would acknowledge and value my efforts. When he arrived home, he greeted me warmly, saying he had missed me, but he seemed entirely oblivious to the transformation of the house. Instead, he immediately settled down to watch his game, leaving me feeling disheartened and unappreciated. It was then that I began to weep, realizing for the first time just how little he truly valued me, whether it stemmed from his ingratitude, exhaustion, or simply his inattention. "Is something amiss?" Dylan inquired, observing my distress. I looked back at him, shook my head, and feigned that nothing was wrong, stating only that I was ready for bed. Before heading upstairs, I gently reminded him once more to dispose of the garbage. He responded with a nod. As I had come to expect, the refuse remained untouched the following morning. My patience snapped when Dylan entered the kitchen and casually asked me to prepare his breakfast. I curtly informed him that if he wished to eat, he could prepare his own meal. When he retorted, accusing me of being impolite, I completely lost my composure. I yelled at him, declaring him utterly useless around the house. He pleaded with me not to be so dramatic, blinking as if genuinely unaware of any wrongdoing on his part. After a deep breath, I pressed him about his consistent failure to take out the trash. "I forgot," he replied with infuriating nonchalance. I then challenged him, asking what precisely he contributed to our home, beyond returning from work to consume beer and watch television. He began by asserting his right to relaxation, claiming constant exhaustion after work. I nodded, conceding his point, but then countered, "And what about me?" I reminded him that I cleaned, cooked for us both, did the laundry, and even ironed his shirts for the week, all after returning from my own job. My sole request had been for him to take out the trash. Dylan simply dismissed me, stating he had never asked me to perform any of those tasks. He further argued that his job was exceptionally demanding and that, as his girlfriend, I should be more understanding and supportive. He even attempted to justify his stance by suggesting his mother had always treated his father in the same manner. This comparison ignited my fury. It dawned on me that despite not even being married, I was allowing him to exploit me, despite all the work I dedicated to maintaining our home. I looked him directly in the eye and declared that I would no longer be assisting him with household duties. I asserted that we were meant to be equals and that I was not his mother. I informed him that he would be responsible for preparing his own meals, cleaning up after himself, doing his own laundry, ironing his own clothes, and taking out the trash. His eyes widened in protest, but I silenced him with a raised hand. I then added that he would either pay half the rent or vacate the premises. Dylan, utterly incredulous, demanded to know the reason for this sudden ultimatum. I clarified that I was exhausted from pouring so much effort into our relationship without ever feeling valued. I departed for work, running late, though he appeared eager to continue the argument. I had never established such firm boundaries in my life, and remarkably, I felt no guilt about it. I remained true to my word, cleaning up only after myself. Watching him stumble around the apartment, desperately searching for clean clothes or attempting to iron his shirts before work, was surprisingly gratifying. He still neglected the garbage and dishes, likely assuming I would eventually take care of them for him, but I consistently refused. I opted to eat from takeout containers, allowing me to conveniently dispose of my own waste without needing to step into the kitchen. As the dirty dishes accumulated and the stench grew unbearable, Dylan made repeated attempts to converse with me, urging me to resume my role as a good partner and care for him, but I remained resolute and unyielding. When the time came to settle the rent, I informed our landlord that Dylan would be responsible for the other half and immediately provided my 50% contribution. Upon his return, Dylan was enraged, yelling at me to continue paying the original 80%. I steadfastly refused, reminding him that he had never once shown appreciation when I did. My assistance to him was definitively over. Despite his best efforts to offer excuses, he was ultimately compelled to pay his portion of the rent to the landlord. Throughout this entire ordeal, he never once expressed regret to me. He never took the initiative to acknowledge his errors or demonstrate any remorse for his lack of appreciation for the domestic work I had performed. It was profoundly disheartening. In hindsight, I only wish I had recognized his true character sooner. Our disputes continued to escalate over the subsequent months, with Dylan constantly blaming me for everything and attempting to manipulate me into reverting to my former behavior. For Dylan, my promotion at work seemed to be the final breaking point. He must have heard about it from a mutual acquaintance, who also happened to be my coworker, because that evening we had the most intense argument of our entire relationship. After arriving home inebriated, Dylan awoke me, insisting he needed to speak. Given his obvious intoxication from celebrating with his friends that evening, I suggested we postpone our conversation until tomorrow. Feeling both sleepy and annoyed, I sat up in bed and asked what was so urgent that he had to disturb me in the dead of night, but he simply reiterated its importance. Dylan then drunkenly admitted that he had met someone at his workplace. I immediately understood he was referring to Bella. I had encountered her at one of his office parties where he had brought me along. Bella was 25, clearly quite affluent, and the daughter of an industrialist. Her only reason for working was her father's insistence that she acquire some professional experience. Dylan continued, stating he was falling for her because, in his estimation, she was a real woman, unlike me. Honestly, I felt nothing. I simply stared at him blankly. We were, by this point, essentially just roommates, and I was well aware that our relationship had been deteriorating for many months. He continued to elaborate on his feelings for Bella, but I interrupted him mid-sentence. I told Dylan I was happy for him and genuinely didn't care if he was dating someone else. I suggested we conclude our relationship amicably and that he vacate our home immediately. Dylan, appearing stunned, questioned if I was envious of Bella. I shook my head and smirked, telling him I was truly relieved he had found someone else, as it would prevent me from feeling bad about ending our relationship. Anger visibly flushed Dylan's face. He claimed my recent promotion had made me excessively self-assured. I calmly responded that our connection had absolutely nothing to do with my career advancement. I had simply reached the conclusion over the past few months that we were no longer compatible. I clarified that I could understand his desire to pursue someone new, given that we had evolved into more of a roommate arrangement than a loving partnership. Dylan began shouting, which caught me by surprise, as I had assumed he would feel a sense of relief. He declared his disdain for modern women who prominently display their careers, like myself. He asserted that Bella was a far superior woman because her only aspirations were marriage and children. Despite his shouting, I remained composed and reminded him that every woman has distinct needs. I loved my profession, but Bella, originating from an affluent background, might not value it as much. I advised him to be with Bella if he desired someone matching her description. I reiterated that we should cease arguing and that he was free to depart our residence whenever he wished. His eyes wide with disbelief, he then questioned my capability of covering the full rent. I clarified that, thanks to a recent salary increase, I could now manage the entire rent on my own, without the need for additional flatmates. Upon hearing this, he began to yell at me, accusing me of attempting to boast in front of him. He proceeded to state that Bella was wealthier than I was, and even owned a house her father had purchased for her. He insisted that I become more compliant and fundamentally alter my character. Then he scoffed, asserting that men ultimately desire a homemaker rather than a woman who could potentially earn more money than they do. I was utterly exhausted by arguing with him in the middle of the night, so I finally pleaded with him to stop speaking. I informed him that he could sleep on the sofa until the end of the month, after which he would be required to move out. Although I could still hear his complaints, I chose to ignore him and return to my sleep. Thankfully, Dylan started packing and gradually removing his possessions over the course of the week. As I contemplated the prospect of eventually having the entire property to myself, I began to feel a growing sense of anticipation. Last night, upon my return home, I was surprised to find Dylan and Bella seated on my sofa. I gave him a questioning look, and he explained that he wished to show Bella his apartment, since it was his final night there. Knowing I would soon return, I found it incomprehensible that he would bring another woman into our shared home without my consent. I greeted Bella cordially, as I wished to avoid being impolite and believed that this situation was not her fault. I was quite taken aback by the disdainful way she regarded me, not even acknowledging my presence. I decided to go freshen up, choosing not to take anything personally. Later, while I was in the kitchen preparing spaghetti for myself, Bella entered to get some water. I felt a moment of discomfort as she stood there, observing me intently. She looked at me with the same cold contempt as before. When I politely asked if she needed anything, I chose to disregard her continued silence and proceeded with making my meal, intending to eat it quietly in my room. I was about to head downstairs after finishing my food when I overheard Bella and Dylan conversing. Bella was telling Dylan how fortunate he was to have upgraded himself after dating someone who looked like me. Dylan laughed and readily agreed with her. I froze in utter disbelief. Then Bella questioned him about why he had ever fallen in love with me. Dylan's response shattered my heart, because I was naive enough to lend him money during college and pay for our dates. He openly admitted that he had taken advantage of me. He revealed that he had managed to save a substantial sum of money because I had been covering over half of our rent for the previous 2 years. I was utterly shocked by what I had just heard. I had assumed he might have exploited my kindness by having me pay over half his rent, but I was completely unaware that he had been taking advantage of me right from the very beginning of our relationship. Bella and Dylan continued their discussion about our past connection, ridiculing me in every conceivable way. I was on the verge of tears from embarrassment, but I desperately did not want them to witness my distress. I quietly retreated upstairs and wept into my pillow for the remainder of the night. When I awoke the following morning, Bella and Dylan had departed. He had officially moved out after collecting his remaining possessions. I finally grasped that I was free of him and wandered around the house in a daze of disbelief. The profound sense of relief I experienced upon realizing that he was finally no longer occupying my home or my life is truly beyond words. I danced joyfully through the house and shed happy tears. Following that, I commenced cleaning the entire place, determined to erase every last trace of him. I genuinely relished my newfound independence over the following weeks. What Bella and Dylan had said about me no longer held any significance. Everything was proceeding well until 2 months later, when a mutual friend at work informed me that Dylan and Bella were getting married. It all seemed remarkably sudden, and I was genuinely surprised when our friend showed me their engagement photographs. They certainly appeared to be a happy couple. I acknowledged that I would never have found contentment with Dylan regardless, but I also felt a pang of regret for how he had exploited me throughout the years. Despite this, I was genuinely pleased that he had found someone who could bring him happiness. Upon returning home that evening and checking my mailbox, I discovered an unexpected wedding invitation. My eyes widened in surprise when I recognized it was from Dylan and Bella. I opened the invitation and noticed something scribbled in the corner. Initially, I suspected it might be a mistake, or perhaps he had invited me merely out of courtesy. Inside the card, it read, "I want you to attend my wedding so you can see the grand life I'm going to have with Bella." Slowly, it dawned on me that he had only invited me to flaunt his newly acquired wealth, his marriage, and his affluent spouse. I took a deep breath, trying to comprehend why he would extend such an invitation, considering all I had done for him over the years was to care for him. My suppressed rage and resentment from all those years began to surge. I realized I had to respond with equal pettiness. With a +1, I replied with a firm yes. I was determined to make Dylan regret ever inviting me, and a cunning plan began to form in my mind. After activating my laptop, I began scouring Bella's social media profiles. I meticulously examined every photograph she had ever uploaded. Fortunately, I managed to locate precisely what I was searching for. Bella and her former boyfriend, Jake, had only broken up 6 months prior. They had clearly been together for a substantial duration, as she had numerous posts featuring him, with their photographs extending all the way back to high school. Jake accepted my friend request for my profile, and once he did, I messaged him. I was genuinely surprised when he responded, and we initiated a conversation. I informed him that I was Dylan's ex, and that I intended to invite him as my guest to their wedding. I revealed everything to Jake, as he seemed genuinely interested and curious about the reason for my outreach. Over the next few weeks, Jake candidly spoke about Bella's repeated instances of infidelity. I was unaware that she had recently engaged in an affair with Dylan. He further disclosed Bella's consistent attraction to older men. Consequently, he wasn't overly shocked when she confessed her feelings for Dylan while they were still in a relationship. As one might expect, Their breakup was quite acrimonious, and even though she suggested they remain friends, he blocked her across all platforms. Based on the way he spoke about her, he appeared to still harbor feelings for Bella. I also shared with Jake my own narrative of Dylan's mistreatment over the years. I confided in him about everything Dylan had done to me and how both Bella and Dylan had ridiculed me. When Jake heard how Dylan had spoken about me and the way he had been treated, he was genuinely appalled. Jake listened attentively to everything and eventually consented to accompany me. I felt a surge of excitement imagining the expressions on my ex-boyfriend and Bella's faces when they spotted me arriving at their wedding with Jake. As anticipated, Dylan's eyes widened when he saw me entering with my special guest on the wedding day. He must have instantly recognized Jake as Bella's former partner. We calmly proceeded to locate our assigned seats, consciously ignoring his stunned expression. I merely offered a small smile when Dylan approached me and angrily muttered, "Why are you here with Bella's ex?" He was forced to reluctantly retreat up the aisle, casting a furious gaze my way, as he couldn't create a scene in front of all the assembled guests. Everyone rose from their chairs as the bride prepared to make her entrance, with her father by her side. Bella looked exquisite in her white, floor-length gown as she gracefully moved down the aisle. Following a flawless ceremony, the festivities transitioned to the reception area. Bella must have changed, as she arrived at the reception in a different dress. Jake and I had not yet attracted Bella's notice. She halted abruptly when she spotted Jake seated beside me. Perhaps still perplexed, Bella glanced from me to him. "What are you doing here with me?" she demanded of Jake. Grinning, I informed her that I had invited him as a guest to celebrate her marriage. Looking utterly furious, Bella's cheeks flushed with rage as she asked Jake if we were now dating. Jake remained silent, recognizing the absurdity of the question in that setting. She gave me a sour look and nodded grimly. When Jake asked if he could speak with her privately to avoid any further spectacle, they both departed. I then observed Dylan, hawk-eyed, watching our exchange. Dylan appeared visibly worried, but he was powerless to do anything but remain seated and feign that nothing was amiss. The celebration continued, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, but an hour elapsed, and the bride was still nowhere to be seen. A few attendees began to notice and whisper among themselves. When Bella's father became concerned, he asked one of the bridesmaids to check on her. A minute later, the bridesmaid rushed back, clutching a message in her hands. In front of everyone, she declared that Bella and her ex-boyfriend had eloped. Everyone stood stunned, utterly speechless. The bridesmaid then proceeded to read the note, in which Bella confessed that she had made a grave error by marrying Dylan and that encountering Jake had reignited all her former feelings for him. Dylan stood there, looking utterly vulnerable and ashamed, as the guests were further taken aback by this shocking revelation. I was genuinely astonished myself. Even though my intention in bringing Jake was to irritate Dylan, I never would have imagined events unfolding this way. Dylan appeared as though he was on the verge of tearing someone's head off. Bella's parents sincerely apologized for the turn of events and requested that all guests depart. I observed Dylan, once so arrogant and pompous, standing there alone, utterly bewildered by Bella's decision. Although I feel a slight twinge of regret regarding the wedding, I am also relieved that Dylan's attempt to publicly humiliate me did not succeed as he intended. The day that was meant to signify his triumph over me had instead become the scene of his absolute downfall. Am I the villain for disrupting my ex-boyfriend's wedding by bringing a specific guest? Since I shared my story, I have received conflicting responses. Some believe I went a bit too far, but many agree that my actions were justified. I should clarify that I never intended to sabotage my ex's wedding, nor did I ever discuss such a possibility with Jake. I have no knowledge of the private conversations Bella and Jake had that prompted Bella to abruptly cancel the wedding. My ex had invited me in the first place solely to parade his marriage to an affluent woman like Bella, and I merely wished to respond with a touch of spite. Bella's decision to terminate her marriage was entirely independent of any action on my part. I have texted Jake to inquire about what transpired, and I will provide an update as soon as he replies. Second update. Jake contacted me with a lengthy text message he sent yesterday. He essentially conveyed his profound gratitude for my having taken him to the wedding. He informed me about his and Bella's honeymoon, which she had originally planned to have with Dylan. Her parents, who were quite worried about her, had also been consulted. He told me that he would be meeting me shortly to personally explain everything in detail. Dylan, meanwhile, had been incessantly contacting me since the wedding. In a barrage of hostile text messages and phone calls, he blamed me for the dissolution of his marriage. I never responded to him, as I had no desire whatsoever to communicate with him. I was well aware that I bore no responsibility for Bella and Jake's joint departure. Dylan chose to arrive at my house today, knowing I would be home during the weekend. I initially requested that he leave and refused to open the door. He insisted he wouldn't depart until he had spoken with me. I warned him he would not be permitted inside, but I opened the door a crack, allowing him to say whatever he wished from outside. Dylan immediately began screaming at me, accusing me of ruining his life. He had apparently resigned from his job, convinced that after marrying someone as wealthy as Bella, he would never need to work again. He angrily demanded to know why I had brought Jake to their wedding, and why I had revealed that I overheard everything he said to Bella that evening. I was growing increasingly frustrated with him blaming me. I then informed him that I knew he had been exploiting me to cover our dates and his rent throughout all the years we had been together. His eyes widened in surprise. He clearly had no respect for me, even though I had assured him that I did all those things because I loved him. I also reminded him that I never interfered in his relationship and didn't care much when he cheated on me with Bella. However, inviting me to their wedding, wanting to flaunt the opulent life he intended to lead with his wealthy spouse, pushed me beyond my breaking point. I informed him that he had no right to come to my home and reprimand me for something that was not my fault. He should direct his anger at Bella, as she was an adult who made the independent decision to leave him. Dylan began to yell back, asserting that I shouldn't punish him for past events and that it wasn't his fault. I was so innocent that I failed to realize how he had been exploiting me for such a prolonged period. As he continued to rant about how Bella was destined to transform his life and how he could have achieved every desire, I simply laughed at his words. He disclosed that I had utterly destroyed his opportunity to charm and woo Bella, despite his most dedicated efforts. At this juncture, I refused to listen to his statements any longer, finding them utterly vile. I threatened to contact the police if he did not immediately leave my property. After he scoffed, claiming I would never dare, I pulled out my phone and began dialing right in front of him. As he began to retreat, he told me not to overreact, instantly taking several steps backward. Before I closed the door, I made a solemn vow to myself that this would be the final time I ever saw him. I have now informed my family about the incident and blocked him across all platforms. To document his actions and to file a formal complaint against him should he return, I intend to install a security camera on my door and change the locks on my property. Update 3. I haven't provided an update for a month. I've been incredibly busy with work, which has prevented me from responding to everyone who messaged me inquiring whether Jake and I had finally met. I'm pleased to share that we did, about a week ago. Jake indicated he was ready to chat and invited me to lunch. To my surprise, Bella was seated behind him when I arrived at the restaurant. I immediately tensed, assuming Bella was there to initiate an argument. To my astonishment, however, she greeted me with a warm smile and a kind word when she saw me. Jake reassured me that she was simply there to apologize, even though I wasn't entirely certain why she felt the need to. Bella nodded and sincerely apologized for her previous disparaging remarks towards me. She then proceeded to recount her perspective on Dylan. She disclosed that Dylan would constantly shower her with attention and kindness at work. Due to their demanding work schedules, they spent a considerable amount of time together, and Dylan would frequently complain about me and our relationship. He would voice his dissatisfaction and express his desire for a woman as attractive as Bella. She acknowledged that each time he complimented her, she felt a sense of gratification and began to sympathize with him. During a particularly challenging period when she and Jake were experiencing difficulties, she became overly emotional and even slept with Dylan. Dylan then persuaded her to enter a relationship with Jake, claiming that Jake was unsuitable for her. Dylan persistently messaged her, assuring her that she was perfect for him and that they could build a life together. She eventually ended her relationship with Jake due to her guilt about cheating and her belief that she could find happiness with Dylan, despite their age difference. Bella went on to describe how encountering me had made her feel uneasy. She admitted that she envied my independence and the fact that I didn't actually require a partner to care for me. She expressed sincere regret for having offended me. I explained to her the immense effort I had dedicated throughout my life to reach my current professional standing, and I told her I could understand her perspective. Her eyes were downcast as she nodded gravely. Following this, I asked her to describe what exactly had happened at her wedding to Dylan. She confessed that she was completely taken aback to see Jake when I brought him as my guest. She realized she had never felt the same depth of emotion for Dylan until she saw Jake's face and fully comprehended how much she still loved him. Jake informed me that after they privately discussed their feelings at the wedding, they discovered their love for each other was still very much alive. Bella had left a note for her family, and so they made the decision to flee together. They were deeply in love and have been an inseparable couple ever since that day. Bella told me that she had discussed this with her parents. They were furious initially, but ultimately chose to support her decision. Additionally, she disclosed that she intended to file for an annulment with Dylan very soon. Even though hearing all of this wasn't entirely comfortable for me, I was glad that at least two people found contentment after such terrible events. I could clearly see Bella and Jake beaming happily at each other. After enjoying lunch and continuing our conversation, we eventually said our goodbyes. I haven't communicated much with either of them since that discussion, as I prefer not to be involved in their personal drama. My intention is to continue dedicating myself to my career and focusing on my own well-being. I am uncertain what Dylan's future holds, but I sincerely hope he can eventually learn from his mistakes and refrain from pursuing partners solely for financial gain. Thank you for watching. If you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so, and hit the notification bell to stay informed about more compelling real-life narratives unfolding around you.